So you got hit by your first fall freeze and some of your plants didn't make it through. Well, it's not necessarily the end of your growing season. Hi, I'm Gardener Scott, a master gardener who discusses everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. Today, let's talk about dealing with freeze damage in the garden. My garden got hit pretty hard by a freeze a couple days ago. I lost squashes and cucumbers and tomatoes all over the garden. But it doesn't spell the end of my gardening season because a lot of plants survived, and even these dead plants open up new opportunities. The first step when you have freeze damage in your garden is to start walking around your garden and figure out what survived, what didn't, and how you move forward. While it's disheartening to see so many of my warm season plants like the tomatoes, the squash, the pumpkins, the melons, the peppers that were all killed by the cold, I think this is a great opportunity for all gardeners, especially new inexperienced gardeners, to recognize just how the different plants grow. During the summer, we're growing those warm season plants. They need warmth, they need heat, that's where they thrive. And any freezing conditions at all will kill them. Well, the opposite holds true for these cool season plants. These beets, when they get too hot, will bolt and send up their flower stalk. They like the cool. So by walking through your garden after a freeze, it's the most obvious way for you to figure out which plants need heat and which plants need the cool conditions. I just planted this bed a little more than a month ago, and the pak choy, the spinach, the lettuce, the turnips, the kale, and the radishes all came through fine. But my pumpkin bed wasn't so lucky. I lost everything. There's absolutely nothing growing in this bed now. The outer leaves of my rhubarb suffered a little bit of damage, but the interior leaves are growing fine and will continue to grow as temperatures stay warm during the day. While the gourds I had growing on this trellis are all dead, the strawberries underneath are fine, as are all the currants in this bed, my butterfly weed, my comfrey. The asparagus had no effect whatsoever. My salvia and raspberries are all doing fine. All of the plants in this bed didn't make it. The melons, green beans, and the tomatoes have seen the end of the season. So now that we've identified which plants survived a freeze and which plants didn't, now we need to decide what to do with those dead plants. And I usually break it down into three basic categories. I either pull them, I cut them and just remove the stalk, leaving the roots in the ground, or I leave them in place and I cover them up. This bed had yellow squash and pickling cucumbers, and as you can see, they're all dead. But there's still enough time to grow more plants in this bed. I can easily grow some fast-growing, cool season plants. But in this case, I'm planning on putting garlic in this bed. So my plan is to pull all of these plants, then amend the soil, and then plant the garlic in a few weeks. I'll treat this bed a little bit differently because I have both cool season and warm season plants growing in it. So the squash and the cucumbers all died, but the Napa cabbage and the spinach are still growing. And even though the Napa cabbage has started to bolt because we had such warm temperatures before that freeze, I want to leave it in place because I can still harvest these leaves. If I pull up the squash plants and the cucumber plants, I could disturb the roots of this cabbage. I don't want to do that. So this is one of those instances where I'll come in and I'll cut the stems of the squash and the cucumbers right at ground level. that'll free up some space because these were plants that were put in the ground pretty far apart. And now I can put in some more spinach or some lettuce or peas or radishes, any of those cool season plants that I still have enough time to grow, even with cold conditions. And in my pumpkin patch, I'm just going to leave all of this here. This is my hugelkultur bed, so there's a lot of organic material buried in this mound. Well, the idea behind the hugelkultur is just to continue adding organic material to really build a nice, rich soil. And this soil was great for my pumpkins this year. Well, all these leaves and all of these stems are great organic matter to help build soil. So I'll just kind of heap these up over the mound, cover them with a wood chip mulch going into the winter, and that's it. I'm just going to leave this mound be. I'll take these little pumpkins and throw them into the compost pile. But for the most part, I'm not doing anything with this bed other than allowing the natural plant material to improve the soil. I'll go ahead and pull these tomato plants out, partly because I really want to focus on improving the soil in this bed. This is the first year I used it. It still needs a lot of organic material worked in, things like compost and aged manure. I'll take the plants and actually put them in my compost pile because I know that these tomatoes had no diseases or pests. I'm confident in putting them in the compost pile. And then next year, using that compost in the garden. I'm not going to do anything in these beds other than start adding some more plants. I have some perennial seeds, some native plant seeds. I'll start sowing them going into the fall in this bed. So hopefully in spring, I'll have a lot of new flowers pop up. An important consideration when your garden is exposed to freeze is just how much more work you want to do. If you have a longer growing season and the freeze is a long time coming, well, by the time it happens and it kills your plants, you might be done. You don't want to sow any more seeds, and there's nothing wrong with that. And as far as just leaving the plants in place to act as a mulch into the winter, protecting the soil, there's nothing wrong with that as well. Just do as much work as you want to do, and don't feel guilty for not extending the season any longer, especially if you've had good success. I just like getting out in the garden and working and making the video, so I will continue to sow some more seeds and try to grow into the colder months. But that's not for everybody. As painful as it was to lose about half of my garden to the freeze, there are also some benefits that I'm looking forward to. Right off the bat, I have half as many plants to water and weed and harvest, and that frees up a lot of time for me to continue building my garden and adding beds. And if you're thinking about expanding, think about this. Don't just write off the season when the freeze comes. Take that extra time and maybe add some more beds to your garden. And as far as the new seeds that I'm thinking of putting in the ground, well, the garden pests have virtually disappeared because of the freeze. Those harmful insects that would eat the seedlings, well, they were frozen out or they've gone dormant in the soil. I don't have to worry about that with the new plants. And all of this dead vegetation, well, it's great for my compost pile. If you have a compost pile and often don't have enough material to put in it, well, after a freeze, now you've got a lot more to boost the production of your compost pile or start a whole new pile. The first freeze usually identifies an important change in your gardening season. It shows that the days are getting shorter and the nights are getting cooler and more freezes might be coming. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's not the end of your season. I look at it as another opportunity to do less in the garden. I've had to water every day, sometimes twice a day because of my low humidity and high heat. But now I only have to water every 2 or 3 days because the cooler temperatures means less evaporation of the soil moisture. And I'm looking forward to that. And there's still a lot of plants that will grow well into fall, maybe even touch on winter for me. And I'll be showing you that in future videos, how you can keep growing with a little bit of cover, a little extra protection in your garden. If you like this video, go ahead and give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to the Gardener Scott channel, now's your chance. And be sure to click on the bell so you know when new videos are coming out every week. I'm Gardener Scott. Enjoy gardening.